Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth Radical Kitchen. My name is Emel, and I'm the projects curator here at the Serpentine. And I'm really excited to have you all at our picnic, co-hosted by Mazimas. Thank you so much. Today, the Radical Kitchen series is a series of picnics and talks where we gather amazing individuals, groups, people, campaigns around London that have really been doing things to gather their communities around an issue, around a struggle, and really make a change for this city. And this city is a really, really difficult city to maintain community. It's a very difficult place to meet and gather and galvanize around issues. It's increasingly privatized and more communities are getting torn apart. And I've been working in a neighborhood just north of the park for about 8 years now that has undergone a massive gentrification, especially in the last 5 years. It's one of the largest areas of social housing in Westminster. And together with the residents and Sam Curtis and Chris Jones, two artists I've worked with for a few years, we made an A to Z of gentrification. So before we started today's picnic, I just wanted to read you an entry from the Church Street A to Z. It's available online. And for D, the group decided to talk about displacement. Does everyone have the right to live where they want to live? There are many arguments being bandied about that if you can't afford to live any longer in an area you live in, then you should move out to where you can afford to live. The argument stems from the logic of entitlement and finance rather than from a right to the city and a right to live where you want. If you can no longer pay to stay where you are, then take whatever money you have and move. And this argument becomes particularly fierce around sites of regeneration. If new homes are built that are for the more wealthy part of the population, then following on from that is that it is common that rents will rise. Local shops will have to move. And for council tenants who are rehoused in housing association homes, rents and service charges are usually more than what they paid for in their council homes. Private renters find that their landlord might prefer a regular turnover of their tenants as they can keep upping rents at each switch. Whatever form it takes, this is displacement. So today we're really, really excited to have Focus E15 mums with us, who have been incredible inspiration for so many people all over the country and internationally. And we're also joined by Architects for Social Housing, who have been campaigning and raising awareness and doing a lot of work. And they're going to speak together and separately about the different projects they've been working on. And thank you so much for being here. But before we have this discussion, I'm going to hand over to Roberta from Mazimas, because there's so much that we want to do in these picnic series. And I think it's gathering people and eating together and caring for each other, which is a very important part of building community.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome. And sorry if you heard me before, because I talk, representing Mazimas. That's why I'm here. And to eat and to talk. So Mazimas means with us in Greek. And it's all inspired by the founder of Mazimas, who had a godmother in New York who was Greek origin, who had these wonderful skills of cooking. She was a wonderful baker, and she had this dream to open a bakery. But then her husband, from the traditional Greek style, said, no, women should be at home looking after children, not in business. So this idea, being an immigrant in New York and having a passion and the skills for doing a job that you could not do, is something that grew in Nikki, this emotional sense of injustice from the beginning for being a woman, for being an immigrant. And connected always food is love and care. And living in London, we realize why are all these shops with there's no real authentic food and the quality of the food, and people want real food. And we have these wonderful women with skills at home looking forward to belong, to have jobs, to be valued. So we make this bridge between wonderful, skilled women and the food London wants to eat. And we all share love and places and belong in a community. So what a best way to eat. So Mazimas, that's the reason. And we are here, and we have our wonderful chefs. You had food from Nasrin, he's from Iran, who has an amazing, she feels almost like a magician. Every day she comes to the kitchen, she brings something new and says, oh, I can show you this today. And I say, what's that? Something you never heard of. And then she cooks and we try. So she's always inspiring us to, there's so much more to be done. So, and she's a mother as well, and she has all these skills, so we think she'll be a perfect example of someone so much to offer and wants to do that we want to bring to the world. And you had some of her food, and she can speak better than me about it.
Hello, welcome everyone. The food you had it today, it was mainly from north part of Iran, where I'm coming from. Astara is the borderline between Iran and Russia. It's very green and lots of food, mainly is vegetarian, but the other meat is regular using, but not as much as here. So what you had it today, it was bagel qatoq, which is originally is with fava beans and dill, garlic, and normally served with a quail egg, and normally serves with the smoked fish and rice. But we want to try to make it like a dip. So we always changing food. If Iranian being here, they will not recognize. They will say, oh, this is not bagel qatoq, but we're trying to make it for the English people to see how the food, Iranian food is here, just a little bit different compared to what originally is. And also you had a dip with the yogurt and cucumber. I'm sure so many countries they have got the same thing, but the herbs is just a little bit different. And the bread was yep.
You made the yogurt.
Oh yes, I made. Yeah.
She made the yogurt and she made the bread. So nothing is bought in a shop. Just to let you know, something common. We find.
Yeah. For me, it's just it's very natural to make yogurt rather than buying it, because you see, it's just one small pack of yogurt. So many ingredients. They're adding so many things. Sugar shouldn't be in yogurt. So because of that, I just started to do the things myself. Sometimes even butter I do myself. And the bread is the Italian focaccia, but the only different, I can't do the things always according to the recipe. So I use that buttermilk out of the yogurt to infuse the bread. So it's just a bit different from the normal focaccia. And the Spanish omelette is Luz Miller. She's not here at the moment. She's the one, she's really good at making. It's really skillful job to make that omelette shape like the round and beautiful as you see today. Normally it's just with the onion, potato, eggs, and sometimes other ingredients you could add it. And of course, smoked paprika on top of that to give a little bit of punch.
Simple.
Yeah.
Very simple.
Very simple. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you.
I just wanted to say to you the tortilla as well. You only get here, or you need to go to Madrid to have the same, because our chef, she used to do 13 years doing tortilla in Madrid. So it's almost like an amazing thing to see when she turns it and we say, oh my God, where it's going to go? And it goes all in. It's amazing. Another wonderful skill. Thank you.
So now I'm going to pass you over to Simon from Architects for Social Housing.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you for having us here, first of all, to this talk. And thank you for that delicious food. It was absolutely wonderful. I did like the tortilla, though, a little. It was very nice. I'm from Architects for Social Housing. Geraldine, who's going to speak after me, is also from Architects for Social Housing, or ASH as we call ourselves, and she's going to talk a little bit about what we do as a group. And then the Focus E15 mothers, who were definitely, as they have been for so many people, they were the inspiration for us forming up. They're going to speak to us afterwards. I think when we were invited to speak here, I thought, what are we going to talk about in the Serpentine Gallery about social housing? And I don't think it's possible to talk about the issue of social housing in Kensington, Chelsea, without talking about the terrible Grenfell Tower fire. So I'd like to introduce what we're going to talk about, I think, by talking a little bit about there. I'm a Londoner. I was actually born here, and I call myself a Londoner. But this is not a part of London I often come to. When I do, I don't feel it's part of the London that I live in. And I wonder whether there's ever been something that's been a London, or whether there has been something that's been called a Londoner. Is there a unity of experience that binds us to this place? I think at the moment, one of the driving issues in social housing is that a lot of people are deciding who has the right to live in London and who doesn't have a right to live in there. And I think the Grenfell Tower disaster, the fire, has made this very apparent, that there's a lot of people making these decisions on behalf of us. The Focus E15 mothers are based in Newham, which in every way seems to be at the pole of Kensington and Chelsea. This is a Conservative-led council. Theirs is a Labour one. They're also, this is the West End and one of the richest boroughs in the country. I don't know where Newham is, but I can't imagine it's fantastically wealthy, is it? And it's certainly deep in the East End. But they do share something in common. They do actually have a rare distinction of being the boroughs that have the highest number of households that have been moved, homeless households that have been moved out of the borough. The figures that I've got is that as of spring 2016, and it's only got worse since then, both Kensington, Chelsea and Newham have moved around about 1,700 homeless households who were living in temporary housing in the borough outside of it into temporary housing. And we've got some people here who can tell you about the experience of that. Now, in Kensington and Chelsea, of those households, 900 of them have been temporarily housed outside Kensington and Chelsea for at least a year. This is what temporary housing is meant to be. I think legally it's only meant to be up to sort of 2 months or something. But once you're put in temporary housing, you tend to stay there for many, many years. Hundreds more have been sent out of the to the outer London boroughs in places like Barking and Redbridge, or out of London altogether, to Kent and Essex. The latest figures for Kensington and Chelsea Council mean that as of March 2017, the council only has 433 properties in the entire borough to let to house people who are homeless households. And yet it has around 1,000 homeless households living in temporary accommodation. Kensington and Chelsea also has 2,670 households on the housing waiting list as of 2014. Now, in 2014, okay, they got about just over 2,000 people. In 2000 and, sorry, where am I here? The very following year, so that was in 2013. In 2014, that number had dropped. Sorry, let me get this right. In 2013, there were 8,500 households living in temporary accommodation on the housing waiting list. The following year, it had dropped to 2,677. So from 8,500 to about 2,500 in the space of a year. What happened to all those households on the waiting list? They certainly weren't housed. What happened is that in 2011, the Localism Act was brought in, and this radically changed the criteria by which people were able to apply for housing to get onto the housing waiting list. In March 2016, a survey was done by Inside Housing, and this shows that 159 English councils had struck off nearly 240,000 people off their waiting lists, and they had barred a further 43,000 new applicants. Now, while this is going on, in Kensington Chelsea Council, under Section 106 agreements of the Town and Country Act, this is what determines the building of affordable housing. Kensington Chelsea Council had accepted £47.3 million from developers in lieu of affordable housing in 2016 alone. And since 2011, the council had built 336 homes, affordable homes. Now, in contrast to this huge demand for housing in this borough, the enormous failure to build it by the council, and this enormous relocation of homeless households outside the borough. The latest figures for Kensington and Chelsea, and these have only just come out today, I think, as of July 2017, is there are 1,857 vacant private dwellings in the borough alone. 111 of these are classified as unoccupied and substantially unfurnished. Sorry, 1,111 of those. In a report published by the Council's Housing and Property Scrutiny Committee 2 years ago, it was found that of the 941 dwellings then classified as unoccupied, 50 of them had stood empty for between 11 and 15 years. Now, the important figure there is that between 2015 and 2017, the number of homes standing empty had doubled from about 940 to over 1,800. So on the one hand, they're moving people out, they're not building houses, but the houses that exist in the borough are increasingly becoming empty. There's a wonderful interactive map by Private Eye that allows you to go in and see every single one of those properties, and the vast majority of them are owned by offshore tax havens in places like the Virgin Islands. Now this, to me, the fact that we can actually track down where these homes are, these empty homes which have stood empty, they're not homes, they're properties which have been bought as capital investments or simply as second home ownership. Most of them are simply capital investments. Now recently, Vancouver, which, if you believe it, is also experiencing a considerable housing crisis, they've recently introduced a tax on vacant homes to try to address this housing crisis. That would be a start, but it's not likely to deter offshore companies registered in tax havens. What I think we need is new legislation compelling a dwelling to be used as such. We're always hearing from councils that these homes are not fit for purpose. What homes are fit for is living in, not simply owning. We also need legislation compelling a dwelling to be used as such and giving those in need of housing the right to occupy empty properties, if necessary paying council rent. We're paying rent to the council. For a start, the laws on squatting, and I bring this up because occupation is something that the Focus E15 mothers have kind of pioneered in the use of changing laws and getting raising political awareness through their occupation of the carpenter's estate. Under Section 144 of the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act from 2012, this changed the law on squatting that meant properties classified as residential, no matter how long they have stood empty and unused, cannot be legally squatted. And to do so is now a criminal offence punishable by up to 51 weeks imprisonment. Now that law was changed in 2012, I think, in anticipation of the enormous number of properties that were and are empty in the UK, particularly in London. As of February 2016, this is not including the City of Westminster, who simply refused to give the numbers because there are so many empty properties in Westminster. There are more than 22,000 properties in London that have been empty for more than 6 months. More than a third of these, 8,500, have been empty for over 2 years. And over 1,150 have been empty for over a decade. Now, to put the background of this is in a city where there are 250,000 households are on council housing waiting lists. There are 240,000 households with 320 children are living in overcrowded accommodation. And there are over 53,000 households with over 90,000 children are currently homeless and living in temporary accommodation. They're the people who are being moved out by boroughs like this. Now, to free up properties purchased for their exchange value and make them available for use by the people who need them, we need a more fundamental change in our laws, whereby the rights of people to use a property as a home takes precedence over the rights of ownership over that property. That's only going to happen, though. History shows that this only happens, fundamental changes like this, through mass occupations of empty properties. For example, following a disaster that makes hundreds of people homeless in one of the richest boroughs in the country. Okay, that's my presentation to set the background. I'm now going to hand over to Geraldine Denning, who's the co-founder of ASH, and we'll talk to you about what ASH is doing.
Thanks. Thank you, Simon, for some kind of extraordinary facts there and numbers. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to Architects for Social Housing and what we do. We were set up in March 2015 to respond architecturally to London's housing crisis. So we're a collective of architects, filmmakers, artists, housing campaigners, lawyers, politicians, writers, and the list goes on. We are fundamentally trying to fight the regeneration of our city and the eviction of its and the social cleansing of its residents. We do that in three ways. We support residents in their campaigns to save their homes with events like Open Garden Estates, which has now been going for 3 years, in which residents hold events on their estates. We disseminate information about housing campaigns across London, so we've got a blog which I recommend you have a look at, and that's mostly a lot of Simon's work there, and collective work that we get information from all sorts of architects around the UK, and we share that information. And the third thing that we do is we propose alternatives to estate demolition, which basically means we work with the residents on council estates threatened with demolition. We work with them and establish that we can build up to an additional 45% extra homes on those estates without demolishing anything. So that's the sort of architectural side of the work that we do. Just very briefly, one of the things that I think is important to do that we recognise is that we need to challenge the myths that we're consistently told through the media, the mainstream media and the press and so on, which kind of establish this process, this mechanism of social cleansing, and that we somehow accept that that's the natural process of events. And I'll just move through these really quickly. So firstly, the housing crisis. It's such a crisis which means that anybody who's involved in the building industry says, well, building more houses, of course, has got to be the right thing. Actually, that's not the case. The idea that the housing crisis is some kind of accident is not the case. This has been legislated for many years, and in fact, the developers and housing associations and house builders are making vast profits out of it, billions and billions of pounds a year, and it's growing and growing every year. Supply and demand, everybody says, yes, we must build more housing to solve this crisis. Well, again, supplying what and for who? If we're only supplying housing that is remaining empty, then it's not, again, addressing the real issue, which is not a crisis of supply, it's a crisis of affordability. And interestingly, a sort of investigation that we explored was the concept of induced demand, which has been applied to roads. The idea that if you increase the width of a road, suddenly you'll reduce the amount of traffic. In fact, it showed that the opposite was true. The more you build, the more demand it creates. It sounds perverse, but I think it's a very interesting thing that's starting to happen to cities. You build more, it generates demand. There's no such thing as enough supply of housing, certainly in somewhere like London. In fact, the more you produce, the more demand it creates. And in fact, the opposite is also happening in cities in the north, which are reducing the amount of housing that they have, and that in turn reduces demand on those cities. So I think that's just something we really need to challenge. Third myth, there is no space left. This one, housing, I think domestic housing occupies something like 0.01% of the land in the UK. And there's more land is actually given over to golf courses than is given over to housing. Number 4, regeneration is a good thing. We're always told that regeneration is going to improve people's economic and social well-being, specifically on council estates. But actually, if you really look at it, the people's economic well-being is fundamentally depressed as a result of it. The rents go up if they're able to stay on the estate. Rents and service charges always increase. And socially, the dispersal and eviction of these communities is never going to be a benefit to them socially. So on both those counts, regeneration is not a good thing for people on council estates. The idea that architecture leads, and council estates specifically, lead to crime and antisocial behaviour. Again, I think this is something which is absolutely fundamentally wrong. the research that we've done, and you can all look it up. There's a map, an online map called Indices of Deprivation, which is government kind of organised piece of documentation. All the estates that we've worked on that has lower crime than the surrounding areas. Aylesbury Estate, Central Hill Estate, in fact Broadwater Farm, Lancaster West, all these places consistently have lower crime rates than the surrounding areas. But we don't hear that, do we? Because it doesn't fit into the kind of narrative that we want to believe, that fundamentally these are places with bad people and poverty, and let's just, they need to be moved away. Council housing is subsidised. If we look at now, most of the council housing estates that we're working with, sort of 40 or 50 years old, they paid off their debts, essentially, years ago. The rents that have been paid for the last 40 years have paid off those debts and are now, in fact, making money for the council. So again, that's incorrect. Affordable housing. Everyone says, oh, fantastic, it's affordable. Well, actually, if you look at what affordable means, I'm sure a lot of you now have started to understand what affordable means. 80% of market rate. So that means if a flat's going for £1 million, £800,000 is affordable. I'm not sure what the maths does there, but it doesn't seem to work for me. And finally, refurbishment is not viable. Again, I think we need to look very closely at the numbers here. We've done that. We've got our proposals costed by quantity surveyors, and refurbishment is always cheaper than demolition and rebuilding. There's really no challenge there. We've worked on. We've done sort of quite serious feasibility proposals for 5 estates, 2 of which have been costed, and we've established that we can build an extra, as I say, 45% housing on those estates. The construction, the sale or rent of a portion of those would enable for the whole estate to be refurbished. And yet the councils aren't really interested in hearing those proposals, because ultimately it's not making the kinds of profit that they want to be making out of these schemes. The last thing as well is about quality. We're consistently told that the quality of these new builds must be better than these old buildings that are kind of full of mould and damp and so on and so forth. But if you take a look, you don't have to look very far. A couple of the estates that have just been finished off recently, Orchard Village for one, Solomon's Passage, I think, they've been up for less than 6 years and potentially going to have to be torn down for the appalling levels of construction. And going back to what Simon just mentioned in terms of Grenfell, really important to recognise that there was nothing, that the existing building was not the problem. It was the refurbishment and the regeneration of that building which caused what happened. And that's something that we think is really, really important in terms of the work that we do. I don't know how many of you recognise that following the disaster, quite a few politicians picked up on that and the fact that it was part of a 70s housing estate, and were making calls to pull down all 70s tower blocks. And this is something that we feel very, very strongly that needs to be countered, because it's absolutely not true. The problem with Grenfell was not the existing tower block that would have stayed. In fact, that's the only thing that is currently still standing. The problem with that was the fact that it was part of a regeneration programme, which again is not unique to Kensington and Chelsea. This is a regeneration programme which is happening across London, and exactly the same conditions that were in place at Grenfell Tower are in place on all these estates across London, where these exactly the same conditions are playing out, with residents not being listened to, residents' complaints. So on Martsfield North, another one, a recent article came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago, last week, again looking at the appalling, the ignoring of residents' complaints and the kind of quality of the workmanship that's gone on, and created these incredibly dangerous places for people to live. So I think that's enough for me, and I think I'll pass it over to Focus E15.
Thanks very much to Ash, and thank you everyone for coming out for a picnic on a rainy day. Somehow it feels quite familiar. So we're from Focus E15 campaign. not Focus E15 Mothers. It is a campaign. We have men, women, all sorts of different people involved in the campaign. And this campaign, it was started. It's worth remembering, actually. It started in Newham. In 2012, there was the Olympics in Newham. Okay, and over the course of that 2-week period, for those 2 weeks, £9 billion was spent on the entire package, including all the security. Okay, £9 billion was spent in Newham and the surrounding Olympic boroughs for those games to take place. And during that time, the second biggest housing co-op in the whole of Europe was destroyed to make way for the Olympics, Clays Lane Housing Co-op, home to hundreds and hundreds of people. And it is in this backdrop, in a Labour borough, that the Focus E15 campaign started in 2013. And what we have with Focus E15 campaign is a group of actually vulnerable young people with children who are living in a hostel. They were living in a hostel due to experiencing homelessness. They were in a hostel because of domestic violence. And within the hostel, there was a mother and baby unit of 29 young mums. We're talking about teenagers, right? With young children, vulnerable young people. And the council cut the funding stream, and the mother and baby unit was threatened, and then the hostel was threatened. The Housing Association didn't want to help. They put eviction notices through these young mothers' doors and told them that they were going to be moved out, that these young people were going to be dropped far away from their support networks to somewhere like, I don't know, Manchester or Hastings or Birmingham, far from anything they knew. And that is the backdrop of how the campaign formed. 29 young people got together. They found other activists. They found community organisers. They found anarchists. They found communists. They found anyone they could who would stand with them on the streets and make an active petition to the council. That meant going down to hassle local Labour representatives. Okay, so these young people, they didn't know about politics. So when they went down to Robin Wales's surgery, they thought their mayor would listen to them. But what did he turn around and say to this group of very vulnerable young people? What he said was, if you can't afford to live in Newham, sorry, you can't afford to live here. And he turned his back. And that feeling of being treated actually like a piece of dirt was the impetus of the campaign, because they wanted to stay next to their support, their friends and their family. And the campaign really is a story of coming together, of active resistance. And because of the strength of the campaign, all the young mothers who were told by the council that they had to be moved out were all rehoused locally in their area. But it took that coming together, that collective action, and that taking on the local authorities and actually knowing who their enemies was to get anywhere with the council in Newham. We've got other people here from the campaign who also want to speak today. The Carpenter's estate in Newham has been left empty for around 15 years. It's right next to the Olympic Stadium, the Carpenter's estate, with 3 tower blocks left empty. So that's over, I think, 410 flats empty, people being moved off. And we've got Vanessa, who's got her mum, her 80-year-old mum, who's on the Carpenter's estate, who would like to speak to you today.
Hi, so I'm here to represent the people that still live on the estate. And that is their home. That is where they are happy, they don't want to go. And I moved in, I was only 1 when it was just built. And it was a thriving, brand spanking new community. And everyone was happy, free. But since the Olympics won, since they came in, they can't get people out fast enough. And now they're saying that the homes are not fit for purpose, when they're beautiful homes. And I just want you to help us fight to keep Carpenter's estate, because they just want to build safety deposit boxes in the sky. That's all they're building. And that does not enrich people's lives. It's community that enriches people's lives, and what they're doing is criminal. because they think because they've got money they can just do what they want. And every letter that goes through my mum's door, she's worried. They've actually made a lot of residents on the estate, they're actually ill. There's people like they've got cancer, they're fighting cancer, but now they've got this other fight. It's like a war on the poor. So join my page, Carpenter's Estate Memoir page on Facebook, and we talk about how it used to be. It was a very strong heartbeat, Carpenter's Estate, and now it's really weak. They're just getting rid of a primary school that was built in about 1968. It's got so much history, they want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of all the homes, and there's not going to be much social housing left on the estate. And it's disgusting. So please, we need you to help us, because they've picked on the wrong mum, they've picked on the wrong home, they've picked on the wrong estate, because I'm going to fight them all the way on my own, or with everybody with me. And if we all fight together, we're stronger in numbers, because they're not getting away with it. Long live Carpenter's Estate!
Thank you, Vanessa. I know it's difficult coming up here to speak, so I really appreciate you coming down today. And also from our campaign, we have Alina. Part of how the campaign organises is that we have a street stall every single Saturday outside Wilco's from 12 till 2. The campaign organises where we meet local people, and Alina has been part of that street stall for some time now, and she wants to speak to you about why she's part of the campaign and some of her experiences.
Hello, thank you. It's nice being here. Food was excellent. I'm single mom of 3. In 2014, my relationship broke down, and I was sent out of Newham to Hertfordshire because I can't afford to live in Newham anymore. We was in studio flat for almost 2 years, 4 of us. I was working at that time, doing volunteering job, studying, and I started to campaign because when I complained to the council about the condition of the place and as well that 4 people shouldn't be living in studio flat, they was trying to send me to Birmingham. This is the time when I met Focus E15 campaign. So I started my fight, and I was successful to get the residents out of the building. There was about 40 flats, single bed sits, and there was families of 4 and 5 living in there. Then, due to the fight, I was sent to Essex in Basildon. Obviously, it was all this movement. My children, my daughter, 9-year-old one now, she had to miss 1 month. First time in Hertfordshire, she wasn't able to get in a school. There was no help with surroundings, with GP, schools or anything like that, so we have to find our own way. The bus was expensive. GP surgery was about 40 minutes from our place. The shops, there was no shops in walking distance apart from some convenience stores, which was quite expensive, living on the benefits. Then I was sent to Essex, same story. My daughter missed 1 month in a school. They punish parents when they miss like days, and they don't punish councils when my children have to miss 2 months in a school. Obviously is mental health issues being due to movements. You miss your community. It's hard to make friends just being in new area, walking on street and talking, saying to someone, can you be my friend? I don't think that's worked like that, but
You okay?
But obviously councils and government, they don't have friends because they are thieves, they're criminals, and they should be hanged. We do have friends, and luckily, even I'm out of, and I'm Londoner, even I'm not born in London. My children, they are Londoners, they're real ones. But all my support, they're still in London. All my friends are still there. So when I come to London, I still feel I'm at home. You are. And I'm fighting 2 councils at the moment, and I'm not going to stop fighting. I had some people who know me. They're not really my friends, but they know me, and they told me because of the situations I've been through, I was attacked by police, verbally, physically, and the council as well. Attacked me in different ways, financially, emotionally. And one of the people told me, you should stop doing what you're doing. And I said, no, even I have to crawl, I'm gonna do what I'm doing, and nobody gonna stop me, and I'm gonna fight for my children and for myself.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think that shows the sort of stress of having to constantly move and the effect that it's having on our children. I mean, just in Newham, if around 4,000 people are in temporary accommodation, that's constantly being moved around, that's not secure. That means if you have a few children, just trying to get them into a local school and then having to move again, it's a cumulative stress. But Alina's very strong because she comes out, she speaks out, and she's part of an active campaign that's building resistance in Newham. Just to get the campaign up to date, we're going to hear from Rebecca.
Hello. So just a bit of what we've been doing recently. So last week, or was it the week before, we had a public meeting, a public talk, and it was Focus E15 in solidarity with Grenfell. And we invited some people to talk, including someone who worked extensively on the Hillsborough disaster. And also local residents who were really concerned, living in East London and Newham, who concerned about the cladding because there's similar issues. Newham Council released a statement about Ferrier Point, which actually had similar cladding to the cladding in Grenfell, saying that it was just slightly more expensive but still flammable. Nothing has really been done about this, and we had someone from Tanner Point, which is an estate in Plastow, and she told us that every night before she goes to bed, she fills her bath up with cold water and a towel just in case she needs to grab her 2-year-old son and run out of the building. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing that we're hearing on a daily basis. There's also another mother who came to speak at the meeting, who's been having a terrible time with the council. Unfortunately, it's a very common thing where she was served a Section 21 by her landlord because he basically couldn't be bothered to deal with, repairs or infestations and things like that. So she was served a Section 21, and the council, instead of helping her, basically said she had to wait it out and get served with court fines. She had to pay for being taken to court by her landlord. So she's actually got to the point where they won't give her a meeting until the bailiffs come and evict her. That's happening tomorrow morning. She would have loved to be here today, but unfortunately she's at the council right now with another member of Focus E15 campaign, and we're going to find out today whether they will give her another home. And basically, because it's this whole thing of you have to, if you leave before the council rehome you, you make yourselves intentionally homeless. So yeah, this is the kind of thing. But we are resisting, and we had an amazing protest outside Bridge House, Newham Council, the other day. It was 2 days ago. And we've also got tomorrow we've got an eviction resistance in the morning, standing in solidarity with Chantel. And also on the 12th of August, we're having a march all the way through Newham. It's going to start at Tanner Point. It's going to Ferrier Point. It's going to go through to Tanner Point, and it's going to end on the Carpenter's estate. So we'd love to see some of you there if you can make it. Please keep up to date by Facebook and Twitter, and come and fight with us, come and march with us. Help us demand that people should have safe homes in East London, and stand in solidarity with the mothers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, everybody, and for all of your inspiring work and keeping on struggling despite the situation and the criminal activity that's happening in the government today. I wanted us to have some discussion, and I know that there are a lot of people here that came especially for this Radical Kitchen because of what we're talking about. And I know there are lots of people here that are doing work that speaks about social housing today. So I'd like to hand over the mic to anyone who'd like to speak. go. I don't know if I can reach you there.
Okay, hello. My name's Lila, and I wanted to talk to you about a project that I've been working on recently with a estate in New Cross, which is called the Achilles Estate, which is 4 blocks of houses and 2 rows of shops which are under threat of demolition by Lewisham Council. So my kind of relationship with the estate was that, I lived in New Cross in my second year, and a close friend of mine grew up in one of these blocks of houses that's under threat. And so, I wanted to do a project which was basically a fanzine, because New Cross has a history of kind of punk and counterculture and resistance. So we thought that a DIY zine was something that was very relevant for this area. So we've unfortunately sold out of them now, but we are going to be doing a second run of them. But this is the zine itself, which was handmade by myself and 2 of the residents. And we partnered with the Achilles Stop and Listen campaign, who are resisting the council, and we got a lot of local creatives involved. So we had poets and photography, and it's a lot of personal photographs from some of the residents. You can find me afterwards and I can talk you through it. But we wanted to basically begin by having a lot of quite personal and interviews with the residents, and then as the zine kind of progresses, the tone gets a bit angrier, and we had an interview with Ash as well, which is the end piece, and also an interview with Paul Sung, whose film Dispossessions come out, which is a really good documentary that sheds light on what's happening, and he's from New Cross as well. So it's just about kind of trying to bring light to what's happening, because actually with this particular area of New Cross, it's in the centre, so what they're proposing to do is demolish the housing and build high-rise housing, which will completely change the face of the area, and not many people in the area actually are aware of this. So what we've begun to do with the campaign is kind of take inspiration from Focus E15 and have also on Saturdays have a stall and meet people and tell them about it. And I think that since the Grenfell disaster, a lot more people are kind of becoming acutely aware of the vast inequality that there is in Britain, and the actual reality of the situation. So that's what we tried to do with the zine, was to make something that was also sentimental, personal, showed the people being affected, and put kind of faces to names to faces. So thanks. If you want to look at it, just come and find me afterwards. And we're going to do a second run of prints, but I'm just trying to raise a bit of cash. But we're on Facebook as Achilles Fanzine. So thanks.
Hello. I'm a documentary maker, and I've just about to finish a film which is basically meant to be shown to people in council estates, because this film will give people hope, which is what I feel people need right now. So it's called Concrete Soldiers, and it features Ash. It features 35%, who's a campaign group down in Elephant and Castle. It also features leaseholders at Ellsbury Estate, who's been fighting really hard. They actually won the CPO, which is very unheard of. So that there are lots of victories in what's going on at the moment. And I just wanted to say, come support my film. It's not out yet, but if you go to Ash, their Facebook page, it will come up there, and you'll be able to see it for free. So watch this space. Thank you.
I just want to add something to that. The film is part of Nikki's film is part of I think 4 films that are being showed. We don't actually know where the location is exactly right now. It was going to be shown in, what's it called, Windrow Lodge, is it Thurlow Lodge, sorry, which is on the Ellsbury estate, which is under threat of demolition and it's being kind of evicted and stuff. One of the reasons they're showing these films, apart from the qualities of the films, is as a benefit night to raise money for the Ellsbury Leaseholders campaign. Recently, the Ellsbury estate was given a kind of a stay of execution by the Secretary of State, who decided that the compulsory purchase order issued by Southwark Council on their homes violated their human rights and also violated the Equality Act as well, mainly because the people would not be given compensation sufficient to move back into the area. Now, we thought it was kind of weird, a Tory Secretary of State actually being on our side. Turns out he wasn't, he's changed his mind. Now, the campaign is raising money for a public inquiry, which is going to be further down at the end of the year, and they need to raise money to pay lawyers and other things in their campaign to fight this compulsory purchase order. So come down to see the films as well, but also to perhaps make a donation to raising these funds. Do you want to say something on that one, Jamie? Just about the actual place. It was going to be on, why can't I remember this name? On the estate. Southwark Council found out, and this community hall, they've now banned them from using the community hall. This is very typical of the kind of things that councils do. They stop residents having access to their own community halls. We're looking for a new venue. We actually do have one, but we're not actually sure where it's going to be exactly yet. It could be on Cotton Gardens and Estate. But if you'd like to come along and see these films, this Saturday, it's going to be a day-long event. Go onto the ASH page, the ASH Facebook page, there's ASH Architects of Social Housing, and you can find out where it is. Jamie, do you want to say something about that?
Not so much about that, actually, just two quick things. Sorry, my name's Jamie, a lawyer working on housing and homelessness issues for quite a long time. I just wanted to one point about ASH's presentation, which I thought was really excellent in explaining just how entirely deliberate this entire policy is of changing the face of London. And there's another aspect to it that we mustn't forget, which is what central government has done to benefit levels and housing benefit in particular. It started in 2008. You'll notice that at that point there was a Labour government in control who started cutting the amount of housing benefit that is available to people as it's set as compared to market levels in the relevant area. And they are set in such a way as to deliberately fall behind market rents in the area. So by definition, people who need housing benefit, which of course includes many, many people who are working but not necessarily on a high wage, will by necessity be less able to afford accommodation in places like London as time goes on. And that's entirely intentional. Added to that, of course, is two changes to benefit reforms that you'll be very familiar with. One's called the bedroom tax, of course, and the other is the benefit cap, both of which, again, are deliberately designed to ensure that people cannot afford to live in parts of the country which are otherwise quite wealthy. And we're not going to be able to tackle all of this unless we also look at that side of the dimension. So just one quick plug on that. Recently, the High Court in a legal challenge did in fact find that the benefit cap, as recently altered, was discriminatory, i.e. a breach of human rights in relation to single mothers with children of under 2 years old. And the reason for that was because it was quite clear that at the same time as government was saying that mothers who had children that young couldn't be expected to go to work, they're also being penalised by the benefit cap, which was forcing them out of London and out of urban city centres, and thereby facing the kinds of crisis that we've heard the mothers from E15 talk about, which is the breakup of your connection to your social support systems, your friends, your communities, etc. That case is being appealed by the Secretary of State. It will be heard in the Court of Appeal, and it's just the kind of case where it'd be really good to see a protest outside the court. We often see it in relation to evictions, we often see it in relation to cases which are directly about housing, but we've got to get on top of the issue about benefit reform as well, because that's where a lot of the damage is being done. So look out, Ash no doubt will publicise the date of that hearing in the Court of Appeal. Please make sure you're there to have your voice heard, make sure the judges know your voice is being heard, and just how pernicious that policy is. Second thing, very quickly, is a quick plug. We actually all have a human right to housing. This country has signed up to that since the 1970s. It's an international UN covenant. Britain is one of the few countries which doesn't enforce that right. In other words, it's not part of your Human Rights Act. It should be, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be. And there is a campaign being run by an organisation that I'm part of called Just Fair, which is trying very hard to ensure that the right to housing is added to your enforceable human rights in this country. Now, that isn't going to transform everything overnight, but it'd be extremely useful if we as campaigners and lawyers and activists had an actual right, enforceable right to housing that we could advocate around, mobilise around, and use to try and ensure that the politicians finally start to move everything in the right direction, so these terrible tragedies and injustices around housing start to come to an end instead of just getting worse and worse year by year. P.S. There's a website, Just Fair, look it up. Please sign up to the campaign.
I just want to say one more thing. I did get a letter through about the benefit cap because I'm in an overcrowded property with my children. And I've actually got a letter saying that I need to move into more affordable housing for myself if I can't pay the rent. So I'm wondering whether I need to go and live in a shoebox because I can't believe what they're saying to me. So obviously, I think what they've done now, single mothers are under attack. Years ago they helped you, but then we got a lot of stick that we were just after housing, and if you was working you didn't get no housing. But now they've turned the tables, so if you're a single mother now, it's just get out as far as possible. I really feel like there's an attack on single parents. It's really sad.
The High Court agreed with you. The judge said it's completely unnecessary pain. It's only the High Court that gets appeals to court of appeal now, and then the House of Supreme Court eventually. But you've got a campaign around to make sure the judge can make the right decision.
Hello. My name is Lisa Mackenzie. I'm a campaigner. Don't like to use that word activist, but I suppose it explains something. I think what we've heard today really is a tiny part of this sort of massive iceberg, actually, that's not just London, it's all over the country. And the problems that we're seeing now, really and truly, it is an attack on poorer people in this country. We are not wanted. They believe that we are... there was a word that they used to use in Victorian times, actually. It was called... they used to call us almost like detritus. We were excess. We were nothing. And eugenics movements, all sorts of movements came out of that Victorian thinking. I would really start to think about the way that the benefits caps have been used, the way that housing is being used as weaponised really against the poor. And I think that these are deliberate. This is not accidental. This is deliberate. That the poor, the working class people of the UK who are seen as excess and nothing are actually unwanted. London is going through a process of getting rid of people who are excess. Simon will tell you, we looked at a report by Savills, and Savills said that the absolute minimum amount of space, because Savills, Sadiq Khan's friends, they measure everything in space, not in family, not in community, not in emotion, not in love, but in space. And the absolute minimum amount of space that a person in London needs to live and work, a single person, so this doesn't take into consideration children, elderly people or anyone else, one single person is £70,000 a year. So if you personally are not earning £70,000 in London, you are a waste of space. And that is as blunt as it gets. And these Savills at the moment are pouring out this research, these hundreds of them actually coming out all the time. And they are purposefully, the language that they use, they remove the sort of harsh language of neoliberalism and capitalism, and they use other language like value uplift. You know, value uplift basically means getting rid of working class people out of the community because they're not valuable enough. So they're using this language. So this is very purposeful what they're doing. And the only way that we can actually form anything and start fighting against this, really and truly is from grassroots movements. We have got to support each other. The stories that we've heard today is a tiny, it's 4 or 5 stories. There are thousands and thousands of stories all over London like this and wider. I've been doing research in Nottinghamshire where I live. I'm meeting women from Barking and Dagenham who have been moved out and are living in mining villages that themselves were abandoned 30 years ago, because the women that have been moved up there are seen as excess and nothing. And so therefore this is a structural problem, and we're not going to fight it alone. We really can't. We need to fight this together as grassroots movements. We need to start to organise, and we need to, and I agree absolutely with Ash, it's time to occupy. We have got to start to occupy and take back what is unjust and unfair. This is not right. So everybody who's here today, if you're from a campaign or a group, it's time we linked up, it's time we organised. It can't, I don't care about, not one day more from Tories, whoever. Not one more council estate it needs to go. Not one more person needs to be homeless. That's what I care about. And so I have no interest where you're from, Labour, Greens, nobody, Tories. I will work with you, because I do not want to see another person made homeless in this city or this country.
Hi, my name is Sian Berry. I am from the Greens. I'm a London Assembly member, but I'm not here to talk about politics, except in the sense I want to talk about what my job is, and some of the things I'm doing, and some of the things I really admire about what the people who've been speaking so far are doing too. I'm London Assembly member. I'm now, for 2 years, I'm the chair of the Housing Committee, and I just feel like that's a really, really important job to have. It's not, I'm a politician. I don't do things. I have a platform in which I can speak. I have a platform in which I can bring other people's voices into the debates in City Hall, put questions directly to the mayor, and I think that's really important job to have at the moment, and I want to be able to do it well, and I would want to say hi because I want everyone to help me do it well. The Housing Committee, we're looking at what's going on. We're going to be looking at the quality of new housing, the mess-ups that there have been in refurbishments in the wake of Grenfell. We're going to be looking at welfare reform later in the year, because that is something that really genuinely is at the heart of this, and I think if we look at that in the committee, we'll do a good job. Simon did a really good job, and Geraldine did a really good job of talking. I used to be a transport campaigner, and the metaphor with the road building is it goes right through. Actually, my old job used to be supporting people trying to stop new roads being built and trying to argue for better alternatives. And that argument of induced demand, that if you keep knocking down and building fancier and fancier homes, the market for fancier and fancier homes that people don't actually intend to live in just grows and grows and grows. And we've got spaces, we've got homes. The actual problem it is supply to some extent, but it's about sharing out the space we have more evenly. And that's an exact metaphor for what we're talking about with roads and road building. So I think that's a really, really important metaphor. One thing about helping people to find homes. I'm a local councillor as well, and the stories we've heard of people who are given absolutely no choice with the issues of benefits, with private landlords throwing you out, that people come to me every week in Leafy Highgate who are having these problems. And the council puts out an advert every week saying how many homes there are available to bid for the people who are on the housing list. Last week there were 0 homes on that list. There was some sheltered housing, but no ordinary homes. There's just no new social housing. There's been, in the first year of Sadiq Khan's mayoralty, and it's not a party political point, but it's the year statistics, that's where they run, there were no new social homes started in London. 0. I couldn't believe it. I had to go back and check. Like, what's that statistic? What are you counting? No new social housing starts in 2016 to 17. 0. In the boroughs around the Olympics, Ken Livingstone said when he first bid for and won the Olympics that, you know, the only reason, I'm not bothered about the sport, you know what Ken Livingstone is like, not bothered about sport. We are doing this to regenerate, to improve lives for people in the 5 boroughs around the Olympics. And one of the key measures for that is in the legacy targets is, has overcrowding reduced in the boroughs around the Olympics? So that isn't about how many homes have you built on the Olympic Park, because if you go and look at the homes that have been built on the Olympic Park, and you've got a salary under £70,000, as I think probably everyone in this tent probably does, you can't afford them. I can't afford them. I'm a London Assembly member. I can't afford the homes in the Olympic Park. And the statistics that measure whether or not overcrowding has got better in those 5 boroughs, you can't get them anymore. The government stopped recording those statistics in 2009. So we actually don't know whether the Olympics has survived. The only really meaningful measure of whether or not the Olympics has achieved what it set out to achieve isn't being measured anymore. So there you go. I could talk about this sort of thing forever, but I won't. I'll end on the 70s tower blocks point, I think, which Geraldine made very, very well. It isn't 60s and 70s tower blocks that are to blame. It is wrong for some of the politicians to go around saying the worst mistakes of the 60s and 70s need to be torn down. They do not. It's the 21st century PFI schemes, the refurbishments that have made those buildings more dangerous than they needed to be. And there are so many really brilliant estates out there, from Central Hill, Cressingham Gardens, which is in the dispossession film, the Achilles estate, Silchester estate. There's so many estates that need to be saved across London, and we all need to work together and defend them and share out the homes more equally, because that is what's going to make a difference.
Thank you again so much for the Focus E15 campaign, and Ash for being here. And maybe you want a last word? One last word.
Sorry, is that okay? Yeah. I want to come back to Jamie. Jamie's a housing lawyer who comes and supports us enormously with it. And he always insists on this point that the law can do only so much, and we need political change. Now, at the moment, I imagine it's one of the reasons a lot of you are here, suddenly everyone in the wake of this terrible, terrible disaster, I don't know what to call it. Is it a disaster? It's certainly not a tragedy. It's a man-made thing that should never have happened. Of course, the Grenfell disaster. Suddenly everyone is interested in what caused it. And we know it's just not the cladding. There are other reasons behind it. It's not just the technical reasons. It's not even the managerial ones. It's the political ones as well. The whole world, and certainly London, the UK, is focused on this. Now, you probably have heard that the government has called a public inquiry. Now, there's, like most things, public inquiries are like public schools. They're private. The first thing the public inquiry has done has taken all the information that was in the public realm into the private realm. All the contractors, the management organizations, the TMOs, the councils, everyone has taken all this information down, and whenever the press ask them, well, what role did you have in it, they say, well, we don't want to prejudice the public inquiry. A public inquiry is not enough. It took Hillsborough 27 years to get the right decision on that. And we were told at your meeting, this guy came to, who was the campaigners in Hillsborough, told us when he saw the Grenfell fire, he said, Christ, this is going to be exactly the same thing. And when he started telling us about the things we could expect from things like the public inquiry, because I've been following this very closely, I thought this already sounds very familiar. It's very important, coming back to Jamie's point, that we don't allow the justice for Grenfell to be taken away out of our hands into the hands of the people who created this in the first place, which goes from the housing ministers, I mean, I've made a list of this, of all the people I think is involved in this, all the way down to the contractors. It's very important that the terms of the public inquiry are made as broad as possible. I think what we should do, and I've been talking to people from the Justice, from Grenfell, from the Silchester estate, from Lancaster West estate, and there is a kind of a feeling that we should set up a people's inquiry. There is such a deep level of mistrust, distrust a complete absence of trust, not just in the residents of Lancaster West Estate, but of every estate across this city, across this country. Exactly, you're completely right. Across this country, with the government, whether it's at central government level, whether it's at mayoral direction, or whether it's council level. And we need to use this to really change what's going on. What killed the people in Grenfell Tower was putting the lives and homes of hundreds of thousands, if millions of people across this country at risk, is not just cladding. It's about the whole attitude to social housing, the privatization of the management of the people who are responsible for our safety in our homes. If there's got to be an inquiry, there is going to be a public inquiry. We need to make it as broad as possible, but we also, I think, need to set up our own inquiry. So to plug this, Ash has produced a fairly large report on the Grenfell Tower fire, which goes from the technical to the managerial to the political sense. It's a very long report. If you'd like to read it, please go onto our website. You can download it and have a look at it. Please share it around. Please send it off your own back, your campaign, to the public inquiry, to the lawyer. The judge. He won't like it because I've said something about what we think of this public inquiry, but send it to them and ask them to expose it up. If you'd like to read it, our card's here, and I'm going to put them here. You can come and have a look at it. Last thing I want to say, estate regeneration, politically, technically, managerially, and economically, it can only happen if there is a cultural and ideological will to allow it to happen. You can't do this to people unless there's a general attitude towards it. I think one of the most appalling things that came out of the Grenfell Tower fire, apart from obviously the deaths, was some of these very nasty attitudes that have come out about the people in the fire afterwards. I think all of us were absolutely disgusted when I think it was the council or the government, I can't remember, they kind of requisitioned about 30 homes on Kensington Row, I think, a very upmarket establishment, and said, well, we're going to put some of the homeless people from the fire in there. And the next day, some of the people who owned properties on those homes were complaining that if these people move in, it will depress the value. And will they also be able to use the swimming pool? This kind of attitude has become it's become ingrained in British society at the moment, and we need to change this. It's not become the nasty things done by the UKIPs and the far right. It's become part of our public discourse, and we need to change that. In the week after the Grenfell Tower fire, Holland Park Opera, which is just down here, held a production of Don Giovanni. Now I went down there. It is in sight of the Grenfell Tower fire, where all those bodies has still not been recovered. There is a big gap which runs right down the middle of British society at the moment. It's between the south part of Kensington, Chelsea, and North Kensington. The new leader of the council divulged, for reasons that I can never imagine, that despite being a councillor for God knows how many years, she'd never been inside a tower block. Someone told me the other day that the new mayor of the council had, and she volunteered this information, never been into North Kensington. So I think it's very important that people like the Focus E15 mothers come to places like this and try to bring this world together again, because a lot of people, as I said before, are deciding who deserves to live in this city and who doesn't. And we have to oppose that, not just politically, but culturally as well. Okay, I think that's about enough. Thank you.